Should podcasters consider using Anchor.fm to host their shows? Should you consider it? Here are my thoughts. What's happening, podcasters? This is Bryan, and I'm here to help you launch, sustain, and improve your show. This is 1,000 Podcasters, where I want to help you with just that. It seems like nearly every other day, especially in Facebook groups, I'm seeing questions about Anchor. Should I use Anchor? What's good with Anchor? What's bad about Anchor? Why shouldn't we use Anchor? All kinds of questions. And I wanted to share this because maybe you have some of those questions as well. And frankly, I have quite a few opinions about Anchor, probably not the most opinions of all. Some of my thoughts are popular and some of them aren't. Some of them align with what some of the top podcast consultants share. Some of them are my own opinion. So what I'd like to do is just share those with you and allow you to make a decision. I don't want to make a decision for you. Now, if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have told you to run screaming away from Anchor, but they've made some changes. They've changed their terms of service and they've changed a few things. So I've kind of downgraded to, I'm not sure that it's a great idea. You might be setting yourself up for failure, but there are some things that I think Anchor is good for, and I want to share those with you. I think that Anchor could be really good if you want to have what I would consider a disposable podcast. This doesn't necessarily mean disposable like totally throw away, but if you're trying to find your voice, if you're wanting to launch a podcast quickly and you're not really worried about the tech and you're not really worried about whether or not you're going to grow a show, maybe you have a show that you're not producing anymore and you want to archive it. You'd like to have it available, but if something were to happen and Anchor were to fail to be a viable business and you lost everything, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So finding your voice, archiving an old show, wanting to get started quickly, okay, yeah, Anchor might be good for that kind of thing. But here's what I don't think Anchor is good for. I think it's not good for a show that you want to grow over the long haul. So if this is something that you're committed to, if this is something that you really want to do, I would encourage you to steer away from Anchor. Now, there are some pros for Anchor, and I want to give you as much reasonable information as I can. I think that, let's face it, Anchor is super simple. They make it incredibly easy for you to create a podcast using nothing but your phone and one app. Okay, they've got that. And they are willing to do some of the really technical work for you to get a show up and running. They'll submit it to Apple Podcasts and the other directories for you. Okay, so that could be a pro. Also, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything to launch a show on Anchor or to maintain a show on Anchor. So that could be a pro for you. All right, so those are a couple of pros. I would like to mention, though, that I'm recording this podcast on my phone. I'm not recording it for free. I'm not hosting it for free, but I am recording it on my phone. So it's possible to do it with other tools, but Anchor is one of those that makes it super, super easy. Now, there's some cons as well, though, and I want to share these with you as well. And the first one might seem like a pro, but I think it's actually not. It's free. And what that means is that your show is the product that they're selling. You are the product that they're selling, or your audience is the product that they're selling, because you're not the customer. So that relationship that you're developing with your audience, the way you treat them and the way you care about them and the way that you're trying to protect them, Anchor may not have that same view of your audience, and their advertisers and the ways that they choose to use your show to generate revenue may not have the same level of concern. Another concern about being free, though, is that every other podcast host so far that has launched a free option has failed. There are a couple that are currently available. They haven't failed yet, but historically, looking over the landscape of podcast history, for as long as there have been podcasts and there have been people trying to host them for free, every single business has failed, which could mean that Anchor is also on the fast track to failure. Now, I'm a little bit less concerned about this because they were purchased by Spotify, so there's some deeper pockets there, but that doesn't mean that Spotify is forever going to be able to and willing to support this free model. Another con, by default, they submit all of your information to all of the podcast directories using their own credentials. Now, this might seem like it's a pro. They do it all for you. You don't have to do anything, but let's think about this. Because there's some stuff that you give up when they do that, because they've used their credentials to submit the show by default. If you allow them to do that, it means that you don't have control over your feed. The delivery mechanism that gets your show into your listeners and to their favorite podcast apps, you don't have control of that. That account is owned and controlled by them. Now, I'm not saying that the people at Anchor are bad. I'm not saying they won't help you. I just have control issues personally because it's my intellectual property that I'm creating. It's my show, and I want to have control over that. Yeah, they're willing to help you migrate if you want to move away, but they have that control. And frankly, I don't feel like they give enough information, especially to new podcasters, when they offer to do that for you. By default, they're going to do it unless you tell them not to. And if they do, you lose that control, and then you also lose access to the stats that might come from that. So being able to log into Apple to look at your stats from Apple, they've got some great stuff. You won't have access to it. And then you also will never get an email from any of the services, any of the directories. Like, so if Apple wants to email you and say, hey, there's a problem with your show, you're not going to get that email. Anchor is. And they're not going to send it to you, or at least they haven't in the past. And so there are some challenges with that. And also on the subject of stats, Anchor has stats. Yes, they do. But what I've heard so far, and I haven't been able to validate this personally because I haven't used Anchor in probably 2 years. I just did it as a test. But those stats are not aligned with the industry standard for advertising. So don't expect to have stats that you can compare to another hosting company. And the next one, this to me is a serious con, and it might not sound like it is, but it's a serious issue that I have with them. I've seen them take credit for things that they didn't actually do. Now, when they send you an email and say, hey, we got you into Overcast. Okay, technically kind of true, because if they get your show into Apple Podcasts, then any of the apps and directories that pull from Apple will have your show in them. So the fact that they got that show in there into Apple Podcasts also means that it's available in those other places. But the way they framed it up makes it seem like they did work that they didn't do, and that they're taking credit for something that isn't really something that they've done directly. And that to me is really dancing a fine line of integrity, and it just makes me a little bit uncomfortable. This last one is a tech issue, may not concern you, but it concerns me. Doesn't matter what you send them, they're going to take whatever file you send them and they're going to re-encode it, which means that you don't have control over what's ultimately delivered to your listeners. Now, I'm not saying that Anchor is bad people, but if I upload a file, I want that to be the file that people download. And especially if I'm dealing with something like sending an MP3 file that's already been encoded to them, they're going to have to decode that and re-encode it in order to be able to do that, which means there's going to be audio degradation. And I want my listeners, I want you to get exactly the file that I uploaded in exactly the quality that I uploaded with all of the other information. Now, other people have other opinions. I'm just sharing mine. I'm actually going to link to another article by Dave Jackson where he shared some similar and some different concerns. I just want you to know what my thoughts are. If you want to use Anchor, go for it, especially if you're thinking about a disposable podcast, all right? If you want to start something and just see if it takes off, and then later you'll consider moving or consider continuing or whatever you're going to do. If you're just trying it out and you want to just try it out and you don't care about growing a show long-term, go for it. Absolutely. If you have a show that you want to grow long-term and you are committed to it, I would strongly encourage you to consider a different media host. And the two that I recommend every single time are Libsyn and Blueberry. A lot of great companies out there. I'm not saying that the other companies aren't great. There's Podbean, there's Spreaker, there's Himalaya, there's all Simplecast, all kinds of different companies out there, all right? The two that I always recommend are Libsyn and Blueberry because they've been here for a long time. They do a great job. And I've just seen them be rock solid over a long time. Now, if you want to go with Anchor, more power to you. Go for it. Just go into it with your eyes wide open, knowing what you can expect and what you can't expect. So that's my thoughts on Anchor. I hope I didn't bore you too much with that. But like I said, I want you to go into this knowing exactly what you're getting and exactly what you're giving up. If you have other questions about podcasting, maybe about Anchor, maybe about media hosting, maybe about editing, I would love to hear from you. If you have something that you'd like to hear answered on the show, you can send an email to bryan@toptieraudio.com. Or if you'd like me to spend some time just talking with you about your show specifically, maybe about your media hosting, maybe about your audio production, maybe something like that, you can set up a consultation. Toptieraudio.com is the place to do that. And if you want to subscribe to the show, 1000podcasters.com. In fact, If you've appreciated this, if you've liked it, I would encourage you to share it with another podcaster who maybe has questions about Anchor and maybe just wants to have all the information. You can go ahead and send that right to them. I'd greatly appreciate it, and I think that they would too. Now go out there and make a great podcast.